She had something most people spend their lives trying to cultivate: a reputation for kindness. Everyone knew her as generous, thoughtful, the person who showed up when people needed help. She was loved, appreciated, the kind of person others spoke about warmly when she wasn't in the room. She's such a good person. You can always count on her. She has the biggest heart. From the outside, it looked like she'd figured out the secret to being valued. Like she'd unlocked some formula for mattering to people that everyone else was still searching for. She had power in her relationships. The power of being needed. The power of being good. But she couldn't sleep at night. Not because of guilt or anxiety about herself, but because she was carrying the weight of everyone else's problems. She had everything people said they wanted: to be known as kind, to be appreciated, to matter to others. And it was destroying her. Kindness, from the outside, looks like the purest form of power. Not the aggressive kind. Not dominance or control, but the power of being genuinely good. Of making people's lives better. Of being someone others need. We are taught that kind people win in the end. That generosity creates loyalty. That caring for others builds deep connections. That being the person others can rely on is what creates lasting value in relationships. And there's truth in this. Genuine kindness does build real bonds. Does create goodwill. Does make you matter to people. She'd seen it work. When she helped a colleague through a crisis, they were grateful. When she showed up for a friend who was struggling, the friendship deepened. When she went out of her way for someone, they remembered. Being kind gave her a role, a purpose, a clear way to contribute value to the world. It felt good. Right. Like she was living according to her values. People told her she was special. That the world needed more people like her. That her kindness was a gift. And she believed them. She believed that being kind was not just morally right but strategically smart. That by being the most helpful, most generous, most caring person in the room, she was building something valuable. Relationships that would last. A reputation that would protect her. A sense of worth that came from genuinely helping others. From the outside, she had it all figured out. She was the person everyone wanted in their life. What they couldn't see was the cost. The first cost was invisibility. Not of her actions, everyone saw those. But of herself. When you're known primarily for what you do for others, people stop seeing you as a full person. You become a function. A role. The helper. The giver. The kind one. And functions don't have needs. Don't have limits. Don't have bad days. She noticed it gradually. When she was struggling, people didn't notice. Or if they did, they seemed confused by it. But you're always so positive. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do. Like her struggle was a glitch in her programming. Like being the strong, capable, always there person meant she wasn't allowed to need support herself. She'd trained people so well to see her as the giver that they couldn't see her as anything else. Even when she desperately needed someone to give back. The second cost was the surveillance of her own goodness. She became hypervigilant about maintaining her reputation for kindness. Not consciously. Not like a performance she knew she was doing. But she monitored herself constantly. Is this generous enough? Am I doing enough? What if I say no and they think I'm selfish? Every decision became filtered through. Will this maintain my identity as a kind person? She couldn't just make choices based on what she wanted or what was sustainable. She had to make choices based on what a kind person would do. And a kind person always helps. Always shows up. Always puts others first. The identity she'd built had become a prison of expectations. Not expectations others placed on her directly. Expectations she placed on herself to live up to the person she told everyone she was. The third cost was ritual obedience to others' needs. Her kindness had become compulsive. She couldn't see someone struggling without trying to fix it. Couldn't hear about a problem without offering to help. Couldn't say no without feeling like she was violating some fundamental part of who she was. It wasn't choice anymore. It was obligation. Duty. The price of being the kind person. And people had learned to rely on this. They knew she'd say yes. They knew she'd show up. They knew she'd absorb their stress so they didn't have to carry it. Not because they were bad people, but because she'd trained them to expect it. And now if she didn't provide it, if she set a boundary or said no or prioritized herself, it felt like betrayal. Not their betrayal of her. her betrayal of them, of the implicit contract she'd signed by being known as kind. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It was the resentment she couldn't acknowledge. Because kind people aren't supposed to resent helping others. Kind people are supposed to give joyfully, generously, without keeping score. But she was keeping score. Not consciously. Not in a way she could admit even to herself. But she noticed who reciprocated and who didn't. Who asked how she was doing and who only called when they needed something. Who appreciated her help and who took it for granted. And the scorecard in her head was becoming impossible to ignore. But she couldn't say anything. Because the moment she expressed that she felt used, she'd violate the very identity that gave her value. Kind people don't complain about being taken advantage of. Kind people don't set boundaries that inconvenience others. Kind people don't say, "I've given enough." So she stayed silent, smiled through the exhaustion, said yes when everything in her wanted to say no, and felt herself disappearing behind the role she could no longer escape. She thought being kind was power. The power to be needed. To matter, to be irreplaceable in people's lives. But it wasn't power. It was a trap disguised as virtue. Because the moment you become indispensable to others through your kindness, you lose the ability to stop being kind without losing everything. Your relationships aren't based on who you are. They're based on what you provide. And the moment you stop providing it, the moment you set a boundary, prioritize yourself, say you can't help this time, you risk discovering which relationships were real and which ones were transactional. That's the trap. Kind people get used not because the world is full of users, but because kindness without boundaries is an invitation to be used. When you never say no, people stop asking if you're okay with yes. When you always accommodate, people stop considering your limits. When you consistently prioritize others' needs over your own, people forget you have needs at all. You've trained them. And now you're trapped by the training. The power she thought she had, the power of being needed, was actually the loss of power to choose. To choose when to help and when to rest. To choose who deserved her energy and who didn't. To choose herself without destroying the identity she'd built her entire sense of worth around. We live in a culture that worships kindness without acknowledging its shadow. Social media celebrates the helpers, the givers, the people who show up for everyone. We share posts about being the friend who always listens, the person who drops everything for others, the one who never says no. And we frame it as virtue, as what good people do. But we don't talk about what happens to those good people. The exhaustion, the resentment, the slow disappearance of the self. The trap of being known for kindness when what you desperately need is permission to stop being kind for a moment and just exist. We've created an entire identity economy around being helpful. Personal brands built on generosity. Influencers whose value comes from emotional labor. Entire careers constructed around being the supportive one. And the more you build your identity around kindness, the more trapped you become. Because what happens when you need to rest? What happens when you don't have the capacity to help? What happens when you realize you've been giving from an empty cup for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to be full? If your entire sense of worth is tied to being kind, you can't stop without losing yourself. That's why kind people get used. Not because they're weak, but because they've made their value conditional on their availability. And people, even good people, even people who love you, will take what's freely offered. They'll rely on you until you teach them they can't. They'll lean on you until you show them you have limits. They'll accept your help until you demonstrate that you sometimes need help too. The solution isn't to stop being kind. It's to stop being kind at your own expense. To build boundaries that protect your kindness from becoming self-destruction. To learn that you can be generous without being depleted. That you can care about people without making their well-being more important than your own. That you can help others without losing yourself in the process. Real kindness, the sustainable kind, the healthy kind, comes from overflow. From a person who's taken care of themselves first and gives from what remains. Not from a person who's given everything away and has nothing left for themselves. The power she thought she had through kindness was an illusion. Real power is the ability to be kind when you choose to be. Not when you're compelled to be. Not when your identity depends on it. Not when saying no feels like losing yourself. Kind people don't get used because the world is cruel. They get used because they've never learned that kindness without self-preservation isn't virtue. It's just another way of disappearing.